Urgent, something incredible has happened near Mala Tokmachka, a bloody meat grinder for Russia. Putin's elite units are rotting in the fields, while the Ukrainian armed forces are already preparing a deadly finale for the Russians. The GUR special forces are already behind enemy lines. The surprise has been set in motion. After this, a triumph from our side. The entire Russian general staff was shaken. Shock, nerves snapped in the Kremlin, heads rolled. Putin has declared a bloody hunt on his own people. Gladkov is fleeing. Dagestan, get ready. The dictator is burning bridges. Real panic has broken out in Moscow. The French Legion of Death? Macron is marching on Moscow. Paris is officially preparing its army for the Great War. This is the total mobilization of Europe that the Kremlin so feared. Russia is drained of blood. Putin's oil empire is bursting at the seams. Production has collapsed into hell and drones are finishing off the last oil refinery. This is the end of the gasoline pseudo-empire. All this and more in our upcoming episode. Hotspot? Shock. A death zone for the Russian Federation. The occupiers have declared victory for the 100th time, but the reality is truly shocking. The legendary Mala Tokmachka has become a mass grave for Russia. While propagandists draw arrows on maps, Russia's elite units are rotting in the fields of Zaporizhzhia. The Ukrainian armed forces are already preparing the final chord. Our scouts prepared a spectacular surprise for the Russians there. Details in the report.
A new settlement in Zaporizhzhia is on the front pages of all the news outlets. Another failure for the occupiers at the front was Mala Tokmachka. There are quite a few urban-type settlements in eastern Ukraine where Putin's army has been breaking its teeth for years, but this one deserves special attention because the number of times the Russians have falsely claimed to have liberated it is countless.
Belosov announced a significant step toward victory in the special military operation. The Minister of Defense congratulated Russian soldiers on the liberation of Mala Tokmachka.
At the Russian Ministry of Defense, this settlement is seriously considered at the general staff level to be the key to the complete defeat of the Ukrainian armed forces. At the front,
the Minister of Defense said exactly that. Mala Tokmachka, he said, is a significant step toward achieving the goals of the special operation. Without any sarcasm.
Recently, people have started talking about Mala Tokmachka because of the memes that this settlement has generated online. The thing is, on propaganda shows, a certain pseudo-expert named Rozhin has been starting his military reports with it for about a year now. And every time the Russians are supposedly just about to take control of it. Journalists didn't get lazy and put together this kind of compilation.
Good evening. What news do you have?
Dmitry Ilyich, if we talk about the situation on the front line, then in the Zaporizhzhia direction, our troops have achieved certain successes in the area of Mala Tokmachka, also in the fighting on the outskirts of Mala Tokmachka, and also in the fighting in Mala Tokmachka itself. Fighting also continues in the area of Mala Tokmachka. Fighting also continues on the outskirts of Mala Tokmachka. Fighting also continues for control of Mala Tokmachka. Our troops also have made small advances in the southeastern part of Mala Tokmachka. Fighting also continues for the southern part of Mala Tokmachka. Fighting is also ongoing for the southeastern part of Mala Tokmachka. The assault on Mala Tokmachka continues. There has been some progress in the area of Mala Tokmachka. Fighting is also ongoing in the area of Mala Tokmachka.
And this is despite the fact that officially Mala Tokmachka was liberated a long time ago. And Putin even congratulated those involved. In reality, most of the village is under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces. About a third is in the gray zone. And only on the eastern outskirts have the Russians managed to barely hold on to some houses on the edge.
The fighting is non-stop and it is bloody. They keep pounding the same positions over and over. Attempts by the Russian army to infiltrate the front line with small infantry groups lead to the deaths of hundreds of Russian soldiers every day.
This happens in different ways, mostly through FPV drones. However, Ukrainian intelligence officers often visit those same houses. Naturally, not empty-handed. It's funny, but even in the Z community, people can't listen to the triumphant reports on Channel 1 anymore. There, they openly say that after a year of attempts to seize this small village, thousands of soldiers have already died, essentially achieving no results.
Today, we are operating in small groups, basically. The question is, can we liberate with these small groups Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Kharkiv, Zaporizhzhia? Cross the Dnipro. Can we do this in pairs or
Not
And now, attention, here's the question. Is it worth losing dozens of pairs every day if we can't? By the way,
the Russian command did attempt to capture Mala Tokmachka with a massive assault. At the beginning of spring, they sent several armored groups and dozens of contract soldiers into the attack at once. As a result, this has so far been the most high-profile failure of the Russian offensive in 2026.
The Ukrainian 118th and 65th Brigades, with support from other units, they destroyed 2 tanks, 12 BMPs, 6 BTRs, and 2 Tiger armored vehicles. In other words, 22 out of 26 vehicles. A complete rout. Not even the powerful shaggy armor in the latest style helped.
The reason for such desperate attempts by the enemy is clear, according to the Ukrainian Armed Forces Command. This is the road to the strategically important settlement of Orikhiv. That's why several lines of defense and powerful fortified areas were built here, which allowed Mala Tokmachka to become a symbol of a strategic dead end for the Russians in Zaporizhzhia.
Heads are rolling urgently in Russia. Putin has launched a hunt for his own people. The governor of Belgorod region is packing his bags. Dagestan is bracing for a strike. The Kremlin has lost its nerve. Putin is burning bridges. He is preparing something terrible. The dictator has begun a large-scale purge of his loyal dogs. Why are they really punishing their own? Watch.
Dismissal and exile or a detention center? The governor of Belgorod region is facing a rather bleak prospect. Vyacheslav Gladkov is about to be removed from his post as head of the border region, all because the Kremlin is fed up with the officials whining.
Well, they've just had enough, really had enough.
Although Gladkov is actually complaining for a reason.
We've never experienced anything on this scale before. We've never faced such problems before. These problems could completely engulf us. The Belgorod region, that's 1.5 million people.
Officially, the Kremlin has not yet spoken about plans to replace the head of the Belgorod region, but their own media have said it all for them. The day before, Vedomosti wrote that Gladkov might become ambassador to Abkhazia, which is occupied by Russia. But that's actually a very good outcome for an official who is now out of favor. Never mind the hysteria over the strikes, but forgiving Gladkov for calling for trials. Roskomnadzor, criticism of the national messenger Max, and statements that Russian soldiers are dangerous for the residents of Belgorod, these things just can't be overlooked. And
the most serious crime for a regional official, he didn't hide his position from the public. And in fact, even the media occasionally reported his statements, including about the blocking of Telegram, for example, when he said, well, you're having fun in Moscow, but we're dying here.
And here is what Gladkov actually said about the blocking of Telegram.
I'm concerned that slowing down the Telegram channel could affect the delivery of urgent information to you in case the situation worsens.
That's why the Kremlin security forces are insisting on pre-trial detention. Fabricating a case is not a problem.
He was unable to organize the defense of Belgorod, and it became necessary to start evacuating people from the regional center. There are also a lot of questions regarding the defensive lines in the border regions. A great deal of money was allocated for their construction. The FSB and the investigative committee have reasonable suspicions that some of these funds ended up with people from the inner circle of Gladkov. And
if not in pre-trial detention, then they suggest bringing Gladkov to Moscow to keep him under control. Russian media have written about this possibility. Supposedly, he could take the position of Deputy Minister of Economic Development. In general, the Kremlin is still considering what would be best.
These so-called security officials, of course, would like to grind Gladkov into dust, throw him in prison to set an example for others. You see, here, to object to wars, to all these things, to protest against lawlessness. So, roughly speaking, supposedly Kirienko's opinion is to quietly send him off as ambassador to Abkhazia. After all, that's quite a position, formerly a high one. And you can't just come and arrest him for that. You practically need a personal decision from Putin himself, because he personally appoints ambassadors. But
while Gladkov's dismissal is still being prepared, the head of Dagestan, Sergei Melikov, has already said goodbye to his position. The
current head of the republic, Sergei Alimovich Melikov, has his term ending in September. He has done a lot, and we are grateful to him for that. But he is moving on to another job. Life goes on.
He was not asked to leave for freedom of speech like Gladkov, although Melikov also says what he thinks.
Tell me, what kind of idiots are these? All male citizens are urgently required to report to the military commissariat, bringing their military ID with them. Are you stupid or what?
There were a lot of questions for Sergei Melikov. Another nail in the coffin. A flood in Dagestan, or more precisely the fight against its consequences, drove another nail into his bureaucratic career. But there is another version from someone close to the authorities. The Telegram channel Kremlin Snuffbox offers another interesting theory: mobilization, or more precisely, the resistance to it in Dagestan. Do you remember the protests of 2022? So on the eve of the announcement of a new wave of mobilization, the Kremlin remembered that Melikov is unable to keep the region under control.
The final decision to replace the head of the republic was made by Vladimir Vladimirovich after he was reminded that mobilization could begin in Russia. No one has forgotten the unrest and protests that took place in Dagestan during the previous wave. Melikov also demonstrated his ineffectiveness back then. We cannot allow a repeat of such problems in Dagestan, a source in the presidential administration explained to us.
Although he was appointed precisely as a kind of overseer in a prison, and at first, that's exactly how it was. But Melikov didn't have the strength to deal with the Dagestanis. Gas.
More gas, more gas. That is exactly what he became widely known for during his time there. Mainly for dispersing large crowds of people, throwing them into dark prison cells, and violently cracking down on them, while constantly referring back to Moscow, and always saying that we must faithfully serve the White Tsar.
And this brings us to the main reason. The failures of Melikov in the post of head of the republic. Dagestanis, to put it mildly, do not like or respect officials.
All of Dagestan hated Melikov. He even had a nickname there, the Turnkey, the Dagestani leader. It was a very strange situation for a multi-million strong republic with a multi-million strong Muslim ummah. A person who was not only non-religious but also treated the traditions of the Dagestani people with barely concealed contempt, because this was a man who had to be carried to his car after the end of the workday since he could no longer walk on his own. You understand, such a person cannot lead.
But that's the Kremlin's problem since they appointed Melikov. And the Kremlin to some extent understands its responsibility. That's why they got rid of their minion. Out of sight, as they say, to suppress protest sentiment in Dagestan before a revolt could begin.
It's important to respond instantly to every local incident if such incidents occur. And that happens. Life is complex and diverse. I need to suppress provocations, attempts to incite discord among people.
Who will replace Gladkov and Melikov is unclear. Obviously, it will be some new figures who are close to and convenient for the Kremlin, but it seems to us the personnel rotations will not be limited to Belgorod region and Dagestan, especially since elections of some sort are coming up in Russia, elections whatever they may be.
Paris is marching on Moscow. Macron is officially preparing the army for a major war. This is the mobilization of Europe. How exactly will Paris strike at Putin? These French-made surprises are already on their way to Kiev. France is joining the fight. How does Macron plan to finally bury the dictator's ambitions? Watch this.
France is stepping in for Ukraine. It is providing intelligence, building military factories, and preparing for war with Russia. Is Macron really raising the stakes? France is increasing its support for Ukraine and doing so in several areas at once. From supplying weapons, Paris is moving toward deeper defense integration.
Until recently, France had intensified the nature of its military technical assistance to Ukraine. This includes not only aircraft, Caesar self-propelled artillery, but also air defense missile systems and air defense equipment. In other words, we're talking about air defense missile systems as well, of short, medium, and long range.
One of the key steps is the joint production of weapons directly in Ukraine. French defense companies are entering the Ukrainian market and discussing the placement of production facilities.
First and foremost, this is a political and military signal, a political signal to the Russian Federation that French investors are considering the possibility of setting up production on Ukrainian territory. Well, accordingly, this is the strengthening of our country's defense capability with direct investments both in the Ukrainian defense industry and in the creation of enterprises on Ukrainian soil. This also means an exchange of experience and technology.
At the same time, Paris is expanding its military supplies. The transfer of Mirage fighter jets is being discussed. Scalp missiles and SAMP-T air defense systems are already being supplied. Essentially, this is about a comprehensive strengthening of the Ukrainian army, from aviation to air defense.
The French side is providing armored vehicles to the Ukrainian side. This refers to APCs and IFVs, which can be used both for logistics by the Ukrainian Defense Forces and for evacuating the wounded. as well as accordingly directly participating in combat operations on the front line. The assistance is also being expanded to include the provision of artillery shells. 155mm caliber, this is a NATO standard shell.
Another important aspect is reconnaissance. And here, the US is taking a back seat as France has assumed this role. While
a year ago, Ukraine was extremely dependent on American intelligence capabilities. Now, France is providing 2/3 of it now. And
this is no longer just assistance, it's participation in key decisions on the battlefield and, in fact, one of the most sensitive elements of modern warfare.
This is a constellation of French satellites. These allow Ukraine's defense forces to analyze the situation on enemy territory and along the line of contact at the very moment decisions are made to strike permanent or temporary deployment points, which are accordingly legitimate military targets on the territory of the occupying country. These are accordingly also French long-range radar surveillance aircraft that patrol the Black Sea area.
Against this backdrop, the French authorities are also strengthening their own military readiness. Large-scale exercises are being conducted in the country, practicing scenarios of a possible conflict with Russia. In
accordance with these exercises, this is a military political signal from France and from all NATO countries to Russia, demonstrating their readiness to counter a possible scenario of an invasion by the Russian Federation into European countries. By the way, it should be noted that there will also be exercises, a joint nuclear exercise between France and Poland. And this is already a direct signal to the Russian Federation that the threat of using tactical nuclear weapons against Poland and a number of other NATO countries will have negative consequences for Russia itself.
But all of this can change in an instant. After all, changes can happen in the country.
Macron has already announced that he will leave big politics in 2027. Even taking into account that Le Pen will not be allowed to run in the elections, representatives of this party will still run for the highest representative office and have a real chance of winning. And this accordingly could mean a possible change in the foreign policy course of this country.
But will Ukraine suffer because of this? And are we really that dependent on support from the French side?
This also concerns accordingly the transfers of Caesar self-propelled howitzers. But again, it should be noted that in terms of price-to-quality ratio, the Ukrainian Bodana self-propelled howitzer significantly outperforms its French counterpart. Yes, France does provide military technical assistance to Ukraine, but not on the same scale as, for example, Germany or the United Kingdom.
France takes on more than just supporting Ukraine. Paris is consistently increasing its military, intelligence, and industrial assistance.
France's position is clear and unequivocal when it comes to further supporting Ukraine in the war against the Russian Federation.
But Ukraine is not lagging behind either. The country continues to develop its own defense capabilities and is becoming less and less dependent on individual partners.
Russia is bled dry. Putin's oil empire is falling apart before our eyes. Refining has dropped to its lowest level in 17 years, and drones are finishing off the last factories. This is the end of the gasoline pseudo-empire. While the authorities frantically switch to manual control, gas stations across the country are preparing for the return of Soviet-era ration coupons. What awaits Russians as soon as tomorrow? Watch now. For the first time in 17 years, the Ukrainian armed forces have reduced Russian oil refining to a minimum with drone strikes.
According to the Ukrainian president's assessment for the month of March, losses to the Russian economy amount to about $2.5 billion as a result of strikes on oil refining facilities in the Russian Federation.
In April 2026 alone, 5 refineries were shut down due to attacks. At least 9 oil refineries have come under drone attacks. According to Bloomberg, the peak month for attacks was December 2025. As a result, oil refining volumes in Russia have dropped to a multi-year low. Compared to last year, volumes have fallen by 12%, and compared to the pre-war year of 2021, by 18%. That's almost 1 million barrels per day.
According to Russian estimates, up to 40% of oil refining enterprises in the Russian Federation have either partially or completely halted their production cycle as a result of Ukrainian drone strikes. In addition, it should be noted that Ukrainian drone strikes have a comprehensive nature. not only against oil refining enterprises, but also against oil and gas extraction facilities, oil and gas transportation stations, and, accordingly, primarily against port infrastructure.
According to data collected by Bloomberg, based on public statements from both countries, in April, Ukraine carried out at least 21 strikes against Russian oil refineries, maritime facilities including export terminals, and oil pipeline infrastructure.
Against the ports of Tuapse and Novorossiysk on the Black Sea, and accordingly Ust-Luga and Primorsk on the Baltic Sea. All of this has significantly reduced the Russian Federation's ability to sell petroleum products to end consumers.
An intensification of attacks on infrastructure. Journalists explain this as an attempt to reduce the windfall profits that Moscow receives thanks to the war in Iran and rising oil prices.
I would note that this is happening in parallel with strikes on the territory of the Russian Federation. The Ukrainian side is also carrying out comprehensive strikes on locations where fuel and lubricants are stored in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. First and foremost, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia regions, and the occupied territory of Crimea. Strikes on oil depots in the territory of Crimea. These include a series of strikes in the areas of Vadiske, Simferopol, and Saki. Additionally, there have been strikes on storage sites for fuel and lubricants lost in Luhansk region.
No fewer than 5 attacks on the Russian oil pipeline system have taken place over the past month. Drones have attacked maritime oil infrastructure 6 times, including ports on the Baltic Sea. Trump slammed the door, but Europe did not lose its composure. The US is threatening to sever military ties with Europe over its refusal to go to war with Iran. But Brussels responded decisively and quickly. Europe is not just unafraid, it is shifting into a mode of total military power. The end of the era of dependence. What will happen with arms supplies? How will Europe respond to this challenge? See all the details in the report.
Donald Trump is offended again and is threatening Europe. The ping-pong of sharp statements between the American president and the German chancellor ended with Trump writing on his social network that the US is considering reducing its contingent in Germany. And as Donald later confided to journalists, not only in Germany.
Did you mention the possible withdrawal of some troops from Germany? Are you considering the same thing with regard to Spain and Italy?
Yes, that is certainly a possibility. And I will most likely do that. And why shouldn't I do it? Italy hasn't helped us at all, and Spain is behaving terribly, absolutely terribly. But this is NATO. It's not even that they're bad. It's one thing if they said it respectfully or said, okay, we'll help, but it will take a little time. We helped them with Ukraine.
You ask without respect. Aren't you offering me friendship?
The fact is, Trump was already toying with the idea of withdrawing troops from Germany during his first presidential term. However, he never went from words to action. He immediately started threatening to abandon NATO partners upon his second coming to the Oval Office. Donald was always complaining that the Europeans were investing too little in their defense budgets. A wave of threats from Trump rose again against the backdrop of the war in Iran. The American president was dissatisfied that the West did not support his idea of unblocking the Strait of Hormuz. Ironically, Trump posted his notorious threats just a couple of hours later. This happened after high-ranking officials from the Bundeswehr and the U.S. Department of Defense discussed Berlin's military strategy, which the Americans highly praised. Therefore, according to Politico, Donald's statement caught Pentagon representatives off guard.
Trump's post on social media became the first signal for many, and possibly a new step regarding the hundreds, if not thousands, of American servicemen from Germany, according to 3 representatives of the Defense Department. This stands in sharp contrast to the recently completed months-long review of the Pentagon's global force posture, which did not provide for significant reductions in Europe. The Pentagon did not expect this and had not planned any reductions, an aide stated. To a congressman familiar with the situation, but we have to take this seriously because he was already serious about it during his first term. He added, referring to Trump's order from July 2020 to withdraw 12,000 American troops from Germany, which was never implemented.
Europeans do insist, analysts say, that they have relied on US protection for far too long, but the pendulum, albeit slowly, has begun to swing towards self-defense. But this is a lengthy and costly process. However, Donald himself is not being entirely honest. The partners are simply too intertwined and connected after decades of cooperation.
I don't believe that Trump will withdraw his troops from Europe. He will threaten, that's for sure, because in reality, there are no truly capable armies in Europe today. Yes, Poland has a decent army because it is large in number, and the country allocates a lot of money for these needs, since war is most likely for them. On par with the Baltic countries, and Poland still has a larger population. GDP is higher, and the EU allocates them huge funds to strengthen their defense. For example, the latest loan is almost 50 billion euros. That's serious money. But the US is not interested in leaving NATO. For Trump and any other American president, it is important to maintain their presence in Europe because of the China factor. If the US is not there, China will be.
Europeans are having to grow up due to objective reasons. Already now, some NATO countries, including the Baltic states, are not receiving previously contracted weapons because of the war in Iran. However, alliance members prefer to discuss this behind closed doors so as not to once again jeopardize the unity of the alliance or give comfort to their enemies.
At first it was like a plague. Russia is bankrupt, but those people are raking in money by the shovel. How much does the conscience of Putin's henchmen cost? While the people rot in the trenches, artist executioners are making a killing. The Russian economy is plunging into the abyss. The budget has hit rock bottom, but the Kremlin will always have millions for its own. You'll be shocked when you hear all the details. Watch this.
They casually joke about the country they themselves attacked. Meanwhile, Russian missiles and drones are killing peaceful Ukrainians every day. The Russians who come to these performances laugh, not realizing that the Kremlin pays KVN comedians for these kinds of jokes.
Oleg, the letter. I feel like if I win now, I'll actually lose.
Just for holding the KVN festival singing Kivin 2027, the organizers of the youth movement will receive 39 million rubles from the budget. Now, the main task of the once popular club of the funny and inventive is to promote traditional spiritual and moral values and to propagate the fight against the West.
If all of a sudden the nations of Europe decide to change their course and try to become close friends with us once again, lifting every single one of their previous bans and offering warm smiles, then you can be absolutely certain that it simply means the harsh reality of winter has finally arrived.
Organizations that glorify participants in the invasion of Ukraine and Putin's trusted associates will once again receive massive funding from the budget as a result of the second competition in 2026. The Presidential Fund for Cultural Values will allocate more than 4 billion rubles to various patriotic projects. One of the largest grants was awarded to Sergei Bezrukov's foundation.
Our brave guys, your fathers, brothers, your husbands, and your sons, who are all fighting so hard today for our collective safety and future security.
67 million has been allocated to the Big Children's Festival, which is organized by the Foundation for the Support and Development of Socio-Cultural Projects, under the leadership of a trusted associate of Putin. This is already the 5th grant received by Bezrukov's foundation. Since 2022, the total amount of grants has exceeded 360 million rubles. Putin's favorite singer Nikolai Rastorgev received 34 million.
For the President of the United States, for a world that is free from Nazism.
A tidy sum is going to the company House of Music, which owns the patriotic radio station Pride. The money has been allocated for the creation and launch of a series of programs on the Federal Radio Channel dedicated to pride in the achievements of modern Russia. And these will be broadcast on this radio station, which belongs to Rastorgev. Exactly why this particular radio station was chosen remains a complete mystery, considering it currently holds the very last position in popularity among every single radio station in Russia.
The nationwide rating of Radio Gorod is only 1% for the period from October 2024 to March 2025. In Moscow, the numbers are even worse. 0.9%, also in last place for February to April. Gordost has a similar rating in St. Petersburg. On the Gordost website, it is stated that the fundamental mission of the radio station is the ongoing formation and strengthening among its audience, a sense of pride for the participants of the special military operation, encouraging support and attention for them and their family members in all regions of broadcasting. Among the station's slogans are "Everyone here is one of us" and "Victory will be ours." The station's regular rotation features artists who support Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Yulia Chicherina, Vadim Samoylov, Lyube, Rastorgev's group, Oleg Gazmanov, Shaman, Polina Gagarina, Alexander Marshall, Denis Maidanov. The voice of the radio station is the actor Vladimir Mashkov, who actively supports the war.
The National Literary Prize, Slovo, received 41 million rubles. The head... Since February of last year, the prize has been headed by Putin supporter Vladimir Medinsky. And right away, the money started flowing like a river.
And in order to stay in power forever and ever, you need a constant, ever-present enemy. You need a perpetual state of war, a war that poses absolutely no real threat to you personally, nor to any members of your own families.
The text of the novelist must affirm the lofty meanings and traditional spiritual and moral values of national literature. In short, support Putin and write something in support of the so-called special military operation. And victory is guaranteed. This is by no means a complete list of grants for which Putin's fund allocates huge sums of money. It doesn't matter if it's talented or original. The main thing is that it's about victory in the special military operation. That's...
For more fiery news from the front, tune in to our next episode.